and, you know, accepting it and saying yes and feeling safe doing it and having like that real, you know, this is why I'm doing this. I mean, for you, it's so dominant that obviously it's, you know, it's Jack, but, you know, here it's like, you know, had this not happened to Jack, you wouldn't be doing this today.
No, of course not.
So, you know, it's that turn of events. I mean, you know, my book, April Rain, is based on, you know, a local murder that happened. And, you know, I don't know what happened to the girl who, you know, was murdered. But I've said to her mother, you know, if she wasn't murdered, I wouldn't have wrote that book. I mean, you know, it's like you just get that calling in the middle of the night or whatever that just makes you want to explore and find out, like, why. And you know, like, when you're saying that people make bad choices, they're not bad people, you know. I mean, and I do see that people, you know, Jack's not a bad guy. I mean, he made bad choices. He made poor choices.
He made a bad
decision. He knows it, and he wants to use, you know, I guess the word is use, like use you to help educate people, because, you know, without his body right now and without his voice being heard to say, hey, I made a stupid mistake, nobody do this. You know, he has a father who loves him unconditionally, who not only is helping his son, but listening to, you know, God, the creator, the universe, taking on this huge calling to help save lives.
So, you know, what I found in this journey is that a lot of the recovering addicts that I have, they've shared their stories with me, they started with a painkiller, prescription painkiller from either surgery or at a party. You know, it comes in a bottle from the drugstore, and
so they're,
you know,
not just like shooting it up or anything.
No. They start. That's how they start. And so I had one gentleman. He's in his 60s. He's a recovering heroin addict. He said he started it at the age of 59. And he's at a party, and he goes, you know, it's from the drugstore. It's not from on the street.
Right. So yeah.
So I'd rather do this than do something I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And you know, my brother took him for a surgery. He was a little goofy, so let me give it a shot. Well, he took it, and a few others did, and he goes, I'm the one that became the heroin addict of the group. So you don't know which one you're going to be. And what happens is you start out. You know, taking the pills, and then I tell a story of an athlete, a college athlete. He's doing 20 pills a day. Then he starts snorting them, and then your addiction, your brain keeps telling you want more. And then you go to snorting heroin. This one individual was doing 20 to 30 packets of heroin a day. Again, the brain gets immune, and then he got with a friend. She put it in him, he put it in her, and then after that he went off on his own, and he became. So it's a process that starts here, and you work your way, put a needle in your arm. Now, I didn't want to believe that about my son at first, but then I realized he went through the same process. So what I'm trying to do with the foundation is get in front of it. What can we do is get in front of it. And so that's why I try getting with the middle school, the parents, things like that.
You know, I think it's really beautiful how, you know, Jack reached out to you in a way to help you heal also. Because I can, you know, I will empathize and imagine the anger that you may have felt towards him. As much as you're, you know, sad and, you know, but as a father being, you know, going through the anger and the madness of, you know, how could you do this? And why did you do this? And you can't get that answer. And then, you know, turning it a little bit onto yourself of, you know, what did I do? How did I not see this? And for him to say, you know, for you to hear him say, Dad, I made a mistake, you know, and what the mistake was, you know, was even doing it the first time, but continually doing it, and you being able to love him unconditionally and accept his apology and understand what his new mission is, you know, in a way, because, you know, we know if he hadn't ever done drugs, his mission was really big. You know, he'd probably be producing movies or shows or things like that.
Yeah,
but
very, very talented.
Once he passed over, you know, I've had these conversations with people who have passed over, and I've heard many times like how, you know, when you're there before your time, they find another purpose for you. And, you know, I feel like this is his purpose now, to help other people. And, you know, and he's doing it also, you know, in an entertaining way, you know, so
he is,
even the way you are so approachable with people, you know, that they can come to you and feel secure and share their story. And I understand. I mean, I had a gentleman come up to me at one of the outreach dinners, and he was telling me how he was a heroin addict. And I was shocked that he shared this with me so openly. And I said, I go, well, why don't you just stop? You know, and he's like, I can't. I go, well, what made you start? And his story really stuck with me because this was a guy in his 50s and he was married, 3 children, was a roofer, self-employed roofer, fell off a roof, had to have back surgery, got on the drug, couldn't work, didn't have insurance, couldn't collect workman's comp, lost his house, lost his family. Next thing you know, he's on the streets in pain, can't afford health care, and he's self-medicating himself.
Right.
And this is exactly what you're talking about.
Yes, I am. Yes.
And the government even, they have to do something to help prevent that.
So again, so I focus on is what we can do as a foundation, and our mission again is to get in front of kids and educate parents. I'll have a gathering with. I did this my last speaking engagement. I looked at the parents. I said, "How many of you right here in this audience right now have prescription opioid painkillers at home in your cabinet or your drawer that's sitting there unlocked while you're sitting here?" And you see people like, and I said, so if each and every one of you right now, when you leave here, go home and lock it up, think about how many lives each and every one of you will save.
Yeah.
And that's what we do.
Yeah. I mean, and so many times when, if you do get that prescription from the doctor, if you're having a surgery or something, they're prescribing them for sort of the proper reason, but they're even over prescribing. So, if they're having extra pills, the doctor doesn't need to be giving them all.
So again, here's what we do as a family and foundation. I had an individual at the walk to another individual. They didn't know each other. The one individual was telling the other one that I lost my son. He had his wisdom teeth out, and he got hooked on painkillers, and got hooked and progressed to doing heroin overdose and died. The other woman called me up, said, "What should I do?" I said, "It's not my decision. That's your decision." But I said, if you're going to bring that stuff into your house, control it, lock it up. And she gave her son one after surgery because he needed it in her mind. Okay, she gave him one when he woke up, and then she took the other 18 and brought him down to a medical drop box at a local police station and
all
got rid of
police
him.
stations have that too. Yeah.
A lot of them do. And on our website, you can type in a zip code and you'll know wherever you are in the country. That young man will not become addicted.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what we do.
It's one fact that somebody needs to know.
And so these individuals are very appreciative.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit one more time about the movie.
Sure.
Because there's a few scenes in there that I just was so heartwarming. I mean, really heartwarming. So
everyone has their scenes.
There's so many scenes.
Yeah.
But there was a scene where, Jack, in a way I felt like almost was finding like a love interest, but it wasn't. He has this encounter with this girl and they have a nice conversation.
Yep.
And, how did that part of the story come up? Because here, Jack's you and Jack are traveling, you're at a hotel and you're going to be giving a speech or giving a talk about the opioid epidemic. And, Jack, walks over to the pool and there's a girl around his age.
Yeah. Okay. You don't want to.
I know. I don't want to give it all away. But he has this conversation and I want to know, how did that scene come to be?
Very, very easy. So one night, Jack came to me and he said, "Dad, I want to tell you what I'm doing." I said, "What?" He said, "I'm helping those that overdose cross over to heaven. And I'm also helping those that lose an animal, helping with their grief. And those are the two things I'm doing."
Yeah, it's beautiful.
There you go.
And I think that scene touched me so much because I resonate with that a lot.
That's a beautiful scene.
As a Christian, as a florist, I've seen this transition where people are crossing over. And, as a florist, I sometimes, would joke in a serious way that I would be one of the 5 people that someone meets when they pass over. Because, you're going to your parents, you're going to, the doctors, the funeral home. They travel with the family, within the first 24 hours, their spirit. When they come to the flower shop, a lot of times I can feel that energy. And, knowing that he's helping others to help cross over and have that friend to hold their hand and say, "You know what, it's going to be okay." on that side for those who do tragically lose their life. But then on this side, he's working with you to prevent people from having to meet him too
to
soon.
educate. Yep.
Yeah. So it was a really beautiful
Yeah, and
moment.
that scene we redid multiple times.
Yeah.
I mean, I can go. We had rain come in. I can go on and on and
Oh,
on.
yeah,
It was quite a. It took a lot to get that scene
I
done.
can imagine all the filming.
But we
All right.
Okay, we're going to call to order the November 13th, 2024 meeting of the Middle School Building Committee. Our first item on the agenda is public comment. Is there any members of the public here? I don't think we have anyone on Zoom. Okay, let's move on to approval of the minutes. We have minutes from the October 9th, 2024 meeting.
I move that we approve the minutes of the October 9th, 2024 meeting.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, seeing none. Let's do a roll call vote. And Marty, can you call it? I just forgot.
Sure.
who's voting.
Nicole?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
Carissa? Yeah. And Julie?
And yes for me.
All right. And yes for me.
Cool. Okay, do we have any correspondence?
No correspondence.
Okay, great. Do you want to take us through the new business?
Certainly. Can we just steal-
Yep.
So,
There you go.
So the agenda sort of lines up with the slide deck that Colliers and JWA have prepared for us tonight. So I'll pull up that slide deck and make sure I have the right one. And I think it kicks off with JWA and then it transitions over to Colliers. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's gonna start with me versus,
Okay,
yeah,
all
the
right.
other way. And,
All right.
yeah, so we'll start off with schedule, and Christian, feel free to jump in on design questions that may come up or anything. So, what we've been doing is trying to come up with a schedule. Previously, our schedules went from module 1 all the way through kind of schematic design. And so what I've been putting together is schematic design through construction, move-in, furniture move-in, and trying to get a draft schedule together based on where we are today. So that's what you have in front of you. That's what's up on the, well, what will be at. That's just kind of a more readable slide that's up there versus trying to put this on there. It was very tiny to see. So what we're looking at is schematic design. And I know we brought it up, maybe one other meeting, is town meeting. And I know we talked about November of 2025, but we also have talked about the possibility of maybe doing a September town meeting. So I don't know if that's something that, Lynn, if that's something that's a possibility or something we obviously have some discussion about, but it was just, you know, giving us that extra couple months helps us at the end of construction with moving in over a summer break versus pushing it out to the following break, kind of mid-year type move-in. So I know it's just a couple months, but those couple months really help with that move-in date. So it's something to talk about. I don't know if you have any questions or any comments on it right now, but
So just so I'm clear, I
Yeah.
believe we need a town meeting vote and an election. Or,
yes, is that right? Or,
because it's a debt exclusion,
Yeah.
right? So we'll need a ballot.
yes.
Right.
Yes,
So-
correct, yeah.
We need town meeting, what is town meeting voting on?
The budget.
Yeah, the budget, yeah, so we'll have
To
by then.
authorize
we'll-
the borrowing,
Yeah,
I
so we'll
guess.
have estimates done by then, so, yeah, authorization.
You did the town meeting vote first, and then you went to the ballot?
Yes.
Okay,
That was for the high school? Yeah.
okay. So, yeah, I'm gonna have to narrow down that timeline.
Okay,
Next year, we don't necessarily have an election on the ballot, or an election on the calendar
Right,
for the fall.
for November, right.
And I imagine you getting our budget together
Yep.
for September would be a big haul. So, I mean, we could have a special town meeting just for this. And then based on when we have when we could have an election. But just a normal course of business, I think September would be very hard.
And does this tie into the discussion later on in our agenda regarding the project delivery method? In other words,
yeah, I
if we
mean,
choose one method or the other, that could give us some leeway or take away some leeway perhaps, or?
what we've been looking at is kind of both methods
Yeah.
for construction. And right now, I think it still kind of gives us the same timeline, but and we'll get into it during that discussion, but what having a CM on board will allow us to do is maybe get in there the summer prior to do maybe some site work. There's early site packages that we could do prior to, it kind of goes in phases when you bid out, when you have a CM. And again, we'll get through that in the presentation, but the end date really kind of came out to be the same, if I'm correct, when we went through it, right?
Right, trying to get us in by September of 2029 to start.
28.
28,
Yeah.
20.
Yeah.
And so the decision on when a town meeting is scheduled, we don't need to necessarily figure that out tonight, but.
Not tonight, no,
Right,
but we
just
just want
for
to, as we
consideration.
go through this, and we'll talk through the schedule a little bit,
Okay.
it's something that, the town would want to, start to think about if that's feasible to do, or if it's not, then we can, look at it. And the other question is, does the town or the district want to have a summer, obviously a summer is the best and easiest time to move in. Would they be opposed to a mid-year move-in transition?
Yes.
Yes, in a word, yeah.
Because what that does, and so on top of that
Sorry.
is, we can move in over the summer, and then as long as we know in construction that we're, 99 to 100% sure that the move-in's gonna happen in the new building, we can start the abatement and demo of the Williams School that summer as well, as opposed to waiting for the kids to move in, and then you have class going on, and then you're trying to do abatement and demo of a building. So it helps out with more of the kind of disturbance to the school as well. That hopefully by that time, the school will be pretty close to being demoed, and then it's really kind of just doing the field work and the new fields and, the parking lots and that.
So you
type of
feel
stuff.
like that all ties back to the timing of the
Yeah,
town meeting?
right.
We're trying to avoid any kind of time contingency where you have to delay the start of school a couple of weeks or something because something happened that was unexpected. That's why if we could possibly do a vote in September, sometime in September, I think we have a leg up on the schedule.
Right.
Not the end of the world, but it would certainly make everybody a little more comfortable.
And that also gives Christian and his team just that little extra time to make sure that they have their design done as complete as possible, and not really forcing them to force a design to get it out, so we have that summer move-in if it's in November. But again, I know there's logistics on the town side to try and see if that can happen.
But if you started construction in the fall at 26, you'd have almost 48 months to get us open in the fall of 28, right? Is it, I guess I've always thought of construction as being 30 months in duration. Is it more than that?
No, it's probably
No.
less than that. It's probably a two-year minimum, but
Right.
two plus years would be more like it, so 24 months.
Right, and it's
Yeah, I'm
probably,
sorry. I'm sorry, my math was wrong.
yeah.
History major. But yeah, I was thinking that, okay, so you would need that full,
Yeah, so
The
you
full
think of
2
it as,
years.
if you
Okay,
have,
I
say,
gotcha.
18 months
Yeah,
to
yeah,
build a new
Right.
building,
yeah.
and then you still have to do abatement and demo and the field work, so you
Gotcha.
still have construction, but
Yeah,
the
yeah.
kids could be into the new school.
Gotcha.
What the thing that happens in between that is once the vote is there to approve the budget for the project, the design team still has to do their construction documents, which is a 9 to 12 months, period of time to get those documents complete and in good enough shape to go out to bid. So that's the little part that we don't want to push them and have gaps in the drawings. We want to give them ample time to get those documents together, get them coordinated with the other disciplines, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, those types of things.
Yeah, so the different phases of design on the schedule here is design development, then we move into 60% construction documents, and then 90% through 100. And so that there, as Alan just mentioned, I think that's 11 months to complete all those phases for on
Which is
JWA
pretty
side.
typical.
Another part on that design phase side, you can see the smaller dates that Colliers has out here. So what's interesting about that is you think about design development being a very long period, but in fact, you're getting the drawings to the estimators. The estimators are looking at the drawings, then you're doing a cost estimate. Then we're approving at a school building committee. Then we're sending it to the state. And then the state's giving us comments. They get 3 weeks to come up with their comments. We get 2 weeks to respond to their comments. Then we go into 60% CDs. So there's lots and lots of kind of
Steps and
steps along the way, and
Right.
you do that again at 60% CDs, and you do that again at 90% CDs. So this is all helpful because it's giving you feedback on how the costs are looking as we continue to flesh out the details of the project. And you get lots of feedback from the state on constructability and any concerns that they have. So it is a very helpful process, but it's a very regimented process that ends up taking quite a bit of time.
Yeah, just a reminder for that estimate process, we will have an estimator on our side, and JWA will have an estimate, so there's two estimates going at the same time, so then we can have kind of a reconciliation. We'll go through scope and cost to make sure that two different companies are looking at it the same way and seeing where those estimates come out.
And I probably shouldn't have been so abrupt about the mid-year move-in. I mean, I'm assuming that's, you know.
No, nobody likes
It's
it.
not, yeah,
to start
it's a lot easier, obviously, to do it over a summer. And like I said, doing a summer move-in along with being able to start the abatement and demolition of the
Yeah.
existing building is also a pretty big thing as well.
The only
and-
people who prefer it are the furniture installers.
They prefer
Because
mid-year.
You'd be the only district that's moving in December, so they have a lot more
Correct.
ability to meet the timeline.
I see.
Whereas in the summer, everyone's crunched, right?
Right.
So that's the only upside that I've seen from that process.
When do you think you would need a final decision on the timing of town meeting?
As soon as possible. I mean, if it's not going to happen, we really need to set our schedule to know that it's not going to happen
Right.
until October, say, or something like that we're going to lose that end of September period. Just so we can kind of, start locking the schedule down, start understanding what dates the deliverables have to go to the estimators, what the dates have to go back to the state, and those types of things really has to be finalized fairly short order.
I said budget before, and I was mixing up my town meeting, so.
No, you're right, though. We have to budget for a town meeting. We have to budget for an election. I mean, those are,
Oh, I mean, yeah, but I was thinking, if we're moving town meeting up by 2 months, it's a crunch, but we're not crunching on the budget, we're crunching on.
we couldn't
normal timing.
we couldn't move the special town meeting up. The traditional one we hold, we couldn't move that up to September. We would have to have a separate special town meeting.
Just for this,
Because
okay.
we won't have free cash certified by then.
That's what I was thinking would be the problem, okay.
It doesn't get certified till October, so.
So there's no way. So this is an entirely separate thing, which may be
Likely.
okay, we just have to plan for it.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, I'm gonna email legal counsel now, and there's a lot of stuff I have to figure out, like if there's an amount of time you need between town meeting and calling the election, how long they have to get ballots prepared, the holiday schedule around that time, just things to sort out, so I'll
Okay.
come back at the next meeting with some ideas.
Great.
And we recognize there are costs involved in doing this as a special, but usually it's minuscule by comparison to
Yeah, absolutely.
the scope of the project.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so essentially, again, the goal of this schedule is to get us in by the summer of '28, and giving the design team enough time that they need to do a proper design. And again, we'll go through a CM at risk versus a GC bid and kind of what the pros and cons are of that later on in the presentation. But if there's any questions on the schedule here at this point, then we can certainly answer these now. Okay.
If, I do
Yeah,
have a
go
question, actually. If we did a mid-year move-in, I know you were saying that December is helpful in the sense of we would be the only folks in that position, but are they genuinely going to be available over the holiday break in December, or might we find that we are facing with even more of a crunch with getting
Yeah,
services?
No, typically, that furniture move-in process is like a 6-week process. So the building is almost complete. The
Right.
furniture installers are starting to come in.
Yeah.
We're doing our punch list, looking at, you're missing, you need a little touch-up paint here and there and things of that nature. So they wouldn't be moving the furniture in just over that break.
Okay, so they would start in November.
The crunch is that you would be moving your students and staff over during
Yeah.
that break, and so that's
Yeah.
the tricky part, for sure.
And you both have some experience with that, mid-year move-ins?
Oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's a crunch, and it's stressful.
It's through the
but-
holidays where they don't really want to be packing up all their belongings and making
Right.
sure that they're all ready to go. So when they leave for the break, the holiday break, they have all those things that now has to be moved into the new building and then unpack it, sometime between when school starts and after the new year
Right,
starts.
because typically what
It's
happens, we'll
very
give each
stressful.
teacher a number of boxes, the principals usually let us know, they get 2 boxes, 3 boxes, 5, so you let us know. No, because they're not bringing everything. So essentially, we set the teachers up with boxes, so they'll be slowly packing before they go on break, and then we'll have the movers come in, they'll all be labeled, and we bring them to the appropriate classroom, so when they come back, their stuff is in boxes, all the new furniture's there, but then they have to unpack, kind of slowly as they're trying to teach as well.
So realistically, we'd be looking at a very strong possibility of an extended break for the middle school because there's going to need to be time for people to do both ends of that. We can't expect that people will have a fully functioning building while also packing, while also unpacking. So realistically, we need a little bit of time on either end there.
For that, I think they just did it, yeah, I've never worked with a school district that's extended their breaks on either end. It's kind of just been your free block, or they stay after for a little bit and pack their stuff up, and hopefully that helps with minimizing the stuff that gets packed, because a lot of these classrooms have stuff that probably you don't want brought over to the new school. So it kind of helps with that process to be like, okay, if I have this limited a time to move stuff, I'm just going to pack the necessities and then.
Sure. I'm just thinking when we come back on January 2nd, we
Right.
can't expect people to hit the ground running when they are returning to rooms full of
Right, so
boxes.
yes, that is certainly a
They-
discussion.
absolutely.
I've never worked with a school district that's.
How much more
done that.
complicated is this when you're talking about combining 2 schools
Right.
into one?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
It
Right.
feels almost not doable.
Even more complicated, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, you could be creative with the scheduling of a professional development day or something to allow a buffer,
Well, now you're changing bus routes
Right,
and pickups and all of that.
Yeah.
So the high school did a mid-year move
that's
in
right,
February
that's right.
and moved from the old building to the new building during February break.
We should talk
And-
about. We should talk about
It
what
was
that looked like.
challenging.
So, yeah, so those are obviously the complications of a mid-year
Yeah.
move, so.
So ideally, we move in the summer.
Correct, but just at least want to lay it all out there that, those are kind of the 2 different options as far as the difference between a September and a November town vote.
Okay.
Move on?
Yep.
Yeah, all right.
Christian?
Great. This is we just wanted to kind of update the committee on what meetings and site visits we've had. So a bunch of folks did make it out to Walpole to take a look at their new middle school, which I hope was helpful, educational. It's a school for 1,000 students, but was similar in some regards. They were combining 2 different middle schools into one. It was being constructed on a pretty tight site. On the top left, that's a picture. Fontaine was the construction manager. You can see the existing school on the left there with the old roof, and they were almost done with construction on the right of Walpole Middle School. Took a few select slides. We had folks there from our office who were really focusing on kind of interior materials, which was helpful, always helpful to see. Other projects. This is Tape Architects, a strong architecture firm out of Boston. So you can see a new kind of science lab up there on the upper right. They had a very large auditorium, very formal. So that was interesting to see. Gymnasium with plenty of natural daylight. And then kind of how they stacked the building was interesting. So on that middle photo, you can see they had nice daylight coming down the corridor, which was open to the cafeteria to the left. But actually, as I understand it, the gymnasium is on top of that cafeteria, like directly to your left, past that kind of wood ceiling element. And so part of the cafeteria was able to be open, but then part of it was lower and under the gymnasium. Again, part of, I imagine, just the constriction from the footprint on the site. But always, great to see other schools in process. And I don't know if folks that were on the tour have any other thoughts or additions.
I like the durability of the materials that they chose. Seemed to be a solid building.
Yeah.
We really liked how much light came in naturally throughout the building. I also really liked how many sort of spaces there were for student collaboration, and just kind of tucking in with a group of people outside and near the library. They had a lot of seating areas. They had a lot of creative spaces for students to use. And they had a really strong focus on how they could use the building as a community resource. So they've expanded their middle school after-school extracurricular offerings substantially, and they set up the building in a way that when it's used by community use on the weekends, it's easy to close off portions and leave other spots open. So it just made it a little more bang for your buck, as it were, which was really nice to see.
Great. So then we also had a meeting with most of the faculty, excuse me, on a professional development day on November 5th, which was fantastic in the at the high school. And then we've tried to have a bunch of these targeted meetings to try and get more specific information and feedback from folks. We're about halfway through that process. We're meeting with Core Academic tomorrow, and so I've got short little, very brief cliff notes from each of these coming up on the next slides. So this was the presentation to the faculty, and we just got this PDF from Vason, our folks that are helping with both the programming and also with the furniture, helped orchestrate the meeting. So they just got all of the feedback. They used a program called Mentimeter to get feedback from the teachers as we were presenting. So Dory opened it up to talk a little bit about, what goes into the process of design, and thinking a little bit about evidence-based design, and really, what impacts student learning. Certainly, the most important part is the teachers and the curriculum, but the building does play a part, and there has been a lot of development over the past 20 years, and particularly the last 10 years, of really trying to quantify that. And so looking at things that matter the most seem to be indoor air quality, access to daylight, access to views, being able to see, and then also there's been studies on, the difference to be able to see 10 feet out of the window versus further than 10 feet out of the window, and being able to see something green, and how important all of that is in brain development. So we were asking the staff to think a little bit more broadly. So, a lot of them, want to focus on, my student desks are too difficult right now. And so want to think a little bit more about how the students can become better learners as opposed to the classroom. We focused on this idea of 4 different environments that students can learn in. A campfire situation, which is illustrated here, where somebody's in charge, could be the student, a student could be the teacher. People are gathered around learning from that singular person. The watering hole, a small group gathered around figuring things out together. A cave, more individual, quiet learning on their own. And then life is, more learning by doing, being outside, and life experiences. So it was great to kind of talk about those different elements with the faculty and get some of their feedback. So on the right there is one of the portions where teachers were just submitting their responses electronically on, what does the watering hole experience provide to middle schoolers. And so it was really interesting to hear, collaboration obviously was a very strong one, but then everything from, problem solving to safe spaces, and then a little bit of feedback on, not just the hallway floor. So, getting a little bit into the design at this point, which was really helpful. Next slide, Marty. So these are a little bit hard to see, but we then tried to kind of quantify how much time in the past week faculty felt that their students were learning in a campfire or a watering hole or a cave or a life situation, and then what they would like to see is the slide to the right. And so they were asked to rank it from 0 to 5. And so interesting to see that, life, student-led, project-based learning had a huge jump of what teachers are used to doing in the past week to what they'd like to strive for in the future. And so our thinking is now, how can the design help support that? And this was an interesting question at the end, is just imagine yourself walking the halls of the new Long Meadow Middle School. How do you see learning happening? So it's interesting to hear, and we kind of felt this throughout the day. Teachers talked a lot about what's going well at the middle schools now, which I think, harken back to Marty's presentation at MSBA. And so, trying to build off of that success, which I think was really helpful to hear. So that was it was only an hour, so we packed it in as much as we could, but great to get that feedback from the staff as a whole. Any questions, or interrupt me as you see fit? I'll just keep kind of flying through here. So we had a meeting on Teldata and AV and instructional technology. Was super helpful. One thing that this brings up is at a later meeting, we will eventually need a list of items from the district that you want to be proprietary. That means typically when we list what materials a contractor is allowed to use in the building, we have to list 3 called or equals. So for the ceiling tile, they could use ceiling tile from 3 different companies. But if there's a specific reason on why you need, a common one is the door hardware. All of your district door hardware is Schlage, so you want Schlage door hardware on your new school. So they can get it from different suppliers, but it has to be Schlage door hardware. And so some of this comes into IT items. So access control, potentially the district might be interested in having access as proprietary. The building management system, maybe automated logic should be proprietary. So no need to decide that now, but these are things for the district and the building committee to start thinking about. Technology needs was also really important. So at the end of schematic design, we'll have a budget. Again, so we'll have the construction budget, and then we'll have this kind of separate budget over here, which is furniture, fixtures, equipment, and technology. And so it was great to understand where the district's coming from in terms of the technology. And from that initial conversation, which again, if the project is passed and we're able to go into design development, we'll go into this in much, much greater detail. But great to learn that it does look like we will have, that the district has made enough investments in the IT infrastructure that that technology budget seems like it will be sufficient. So that was great news. Meeting with custodial, we were talking a little bit about finishes, which was great to get, again, very early feedback. And again, this will be something that we will come back to you. These change a lot during the cost estimate process, where it depends on how the project's coming in. And then, again, we will go through this in much, much more detail when we're in design development and construction documents. We'll bring in samples. The building committee will be able to, feel and touch the different options. But a good place to get a starting point and just a general understanding at this early phase. So looking at something quite robust for the high traffic areas, porcelain ceramic tile, looking at a sheet good like linoleum in the academic areas, a rubber floor at labs and also at stairs, which is pretty typical, sealed concrete at the utility spaces, kind of in custodial closets and things of that nature, carpet in offices and where we want a quieter, softer environment, epoxy resin, so sometimes it goes to Cori tile, but epoxy resin is another option in the kitchen and servery. That was great to get. And then we talked a little bit about walls, looking at a wainscot, like a wall tile wainscot in the corridors, ceramic tile in the bathrooms. So again, early days, but great to get that feedback now.
Chris, can you contrast some of the choices that are sort of emerging here, or that you got feedback on, with what the alternatives might be? So linoleum in the academic areas instead of, or versus what? Or porcelain ceramic tile in the high traffic areas versus, like, what are some of the other options?
Sure. So porcelain ceramic tile is Well, so more expensive than that is an terrazzo, an epoxy terrazzo flooring, and so potentially we can have that in some spaces, or maybe the main entry, but not the main corridors. These are things that we'll kind of evaluate as we go down the cost estimate path. We've certainly done schools on tight budgets where we do porcelain ceramic tile in the main lobby and then switch to a linoleum in the hallways. So not as robust, but if you're on a severe budget, those are the kinds of decisions that have to be made. For the academic areas, linoleum I think is, by far what we prefer and strongly recommend. Vinyl tile is another option, vinyl composition tile, and the linoleum is much better in terms of the indoor air quality aspects of it, the off-gassing, and has come a long way in terms of its finishing. You don't need to put a wax on it like the old vinyl tile, so it's a lot less maintenance. So again, many things to consider there. Rubber, same thing. It's a little bit more robust than linoleum, so helpful on the stairs. In utility spaces, sealed concrete is typically what we do. There's nothing wrong with it unless for some reason the district wants Corey tile or something more expensive in those spaces. Carpet is definitely a decision between carpet tile and sheet good carpet. In general, we've had more luck with carpet tile as of late. Sometimes there's issues with it coming up, but that seems to have gotten better, and it's much easier to kind of repair and replace sections at a time. And then epoxy resin, I think, is a little bit more expensive than Corey tile for the kitchen and servery, but really comes down to a district preference on that one.
Can I ask a question? Maybe this is wordy, but are there any decisions that are pending for the schools or for the school committee that affect how you think about design elements? Like the one that comes to mind is the thing about cell phones and whether we want kids to have access to cell phones in school. Would that kind of accelerate some of those decisions, or are there other things that are on your mind?
I'd have to think about that, but it brings to mind, are the schools that have built-in places for cell phones in classrooms or something? I wonder if there are things like that, yeah.
Yeah, the only other thing that comes to mind is updates that we're going to make to the curriculum, or changes that might change how you think about what technology you want in the classroom.
Right. Yeah, I think, certainly we have some curriculum adoptions on the horizon, and I think, middle school is going to be a focal area for us in the next few years. I can't think of how that might change the layout and design of classrooms necessarily, but I think the move to, a good example of what you're talking about would be like the move to STEAM programming at the middle school, which requires a certain type of classroom, I suppose, so that's a good question. I think it probably would want some time to think about that, though.
Yeah, that's a great question, Julie.
Yeah.
And I think one that really we skipped over a little bit, but on the previous one on IT, whether to go with a large flat screen or an interactive projector, that's a huge decision that, again, we'll use this as kind of a starting point and help set the budget, but should get a lot more feedback and discussion.
I was just thinking about one of the rooms that we saw when we did our last visit, that was for their STEAM room, and how so much of it was movable. Not just the furniture, but even at the top they had the running things for plugging things in. So it just made it a very usable space, very versatile for whatever the needs were as the STEAM program continues to grow and change over the years.
It seems to be, even among the staff, some interest in application, real-world, authentic opportunities to apply what they've learned. And so what type of furniture does that lead us towards, or what type of room design does that lead us towards? So those are the things that, absolutely.
Great. We had a good meeting with kitchen folks, and we have a specific kitchen consultant on the project, so helpful for them to meet and talk directly. I don't think anything too, one of the more interesting was to have a variety of table sizes and eating spaces, but not much of an interest of a built-in seating area. That, again, trying to keep it as flexible and open and as possible. So that was interesting to hear. Bathrooms is a huge topic these days in schools, and so we will be back with many options to show you and kind of go through. But great to get some initial feedback. Definitely some concerns regarding supervision and bullying and vaping. 2 entrance bathrooms, and so that's often called like an airport-style bathroom. There was some talk about having a shared sink between those 2, which again can just kind of help keep it feel open and visible. Talking about locker rooms was great, again, in terms of trying to make sure that we're utilizing that square footage as efficiently as possible. So more toilet rooms and a few changing stalls. And we met with the athletics folks, and they agreed with that. So again, good to get some initial feedback, and we'll go from there. Yeah, so we were able to meet with one of the gym teachers, and great to get some feedback on outdoor spaces as well as indoor spaces. I think the plan so far, again, right, we were very early on, but the site plan was kind of showing a more formal practice field and maybe even bleachers on the sides. And he expressed, more interest in having as much play surface as possible, not so much interest in the bleachers, which I think makes a lot of sense. A huge benefit in permanent lighting. A big topic that I think we'll save for another night, because we'll have a lot coming up from Colliers, but is potentially of a turf field. So again, something else to kind of put on folks' radars to start thinking about, whether that would be helpful, whether we should try and include that in the budget. Sometimes that can be an add alternate or a deduct alternate, where we're not sure if the project can afford it or not, but we first want to understand if that's a desire from the building committee in the district. In terms of the indoor, looking at a center divider curtain so that they can use the gym 2 different sides of it at the same time. Interest in the volleyball nets, 6 basketball hoops, kind of 4 for practice and 2 for a main high school sized basketball court. And good to get into the details of kind of sound in the gym and things of that nature. So, and we talked about alt-PE as well. So, yeah, very helpful. So that's the summary of those meetings we've had so far. Again, we're meeting with Core Academic tomorrow, and we've got more staff meetings coming up, but any questions on that so far? Great. I think I'm going to turn it over to Colin.
All right. So as I mentioned earlier, in construction, there's 2 different, we call them delivery methods for construction, and that is having a general contractor, or the other delivery method is having a CM at risk, a construction manager at risk. And so I can talk through these. I'll go through what your general contractor is traditional, your design, JWA does their design all the way through 100%. You put that design out to bid, and then you get the low bid, and that's, as long as they're a responsible low bidder, that's who you go with. And it's pretty straightforward. It's a kind of an easy bidding process, and we've done it 100 times, and it's pretty straightforward. Where a construction manager at risk is, it's another delivery method that's newer than kind of the design bid build method. That's when you would hire a construction manager during design. So you essentially, after town vote and we get approval, is when you would bring on a construction manager to help assist with the entire design. So they would be there as kind of integrated into this entire team with the committee, with us, with JWA, and they would be there looking at JWA's design and kind of giving some of their feedback and you know, is some of their design, they may have questions with constructability, and again, jump in and help me out with anything on here that you think I'm missing, but we'll go through it all. But they come in and help assist through design, and they're there throughout the entire process, and then they're obviously there through the entire construction process as well. They usually have a larger staff on board, so there's a lot of pros and cons that I'll go through here during these slides, but those are the two different methods we'll talk about today. So general contractor, that's bringing on just a GC, that's a hard bid, that's doing the design, bid, build. So again, that's the traditional approach. As I mentioned, it's designed through 100%, and then it goes to the low bidder for the town. So in town here, we've done the adult center and the DPW through that method. And so there's a pre-qualification process that you have to go through of anything over $10 million. And so that's something that we'll kind of coordinate that whole entire pre-qualification. So we do it for the general contractors, and then we also do a pre-qualification of any potential filed sub-bids. And so we'll go through and get reference checks, similar to what you guys did for an OPM and what we did for a designer. We'll go through and get reference checks, and there's a whole scoring sheet and matrix that goes through. And if they're qualified to bid on a project, you let them know, and then they bid on that particular project. And then, again, the contract is based upon a lump sum amount. And some of the advantages of that, again, we've done that process 100 times. It's a pretty familiar process to us. Again, the lowest responsible and eligible bidder is accepted. Some of the disadvantage is, you know, it's a linear process. There's no opportunity to bring in any early scopes of the project. So with a CM at risk, as they're on earlier, they can actually start some of the site work packages maybe sooner than when the documents aren't up to 100% yet. So between like the 60 and 90%, maybe we have a site work package that's kind of ready to go. That GC can then, they'll separate it into smaller packages as far as how they get bid out and bought out by the district. And so that package, maybe they'll just do a smaller site work package that gets bought out, and that's their first kind of amendment to their contract. And they can get in and start some of that early site work while we're still in design, while we're still getting ready for the next package to be bid out. They can start earlier. So that's some of the advantage of the CM at risk. But sticking with the GC, is it pre-qualification or filed subcontractors only? There's no owner input really on the non-filed sub-bids. So you have filed sub-bids and you have non-filed sub-bids. So a general contractor, like a site contractor, is typically a non-filed. So if you get the general contractor can bring on anybody they want, and we don't have a say on that. But the filed sub-bids, obviously we can go through and do pre-qualifications, but if they only get the lowest bidder. So that general contractor has to take the low bidder of those filed subs, unless there's something that comes up during the bid process that we can reject it on. Other than that, they're taking the lowest bidder, where CM at risk, you have a little bit more input on that process. Yeah.
Can I ask you to just expand on that idea of non-filed subcontractors? What would be sort of an example of that?
So a site work contractor, somebody who's in doing, you know, a lot of the excavation and the field work and that type of stuff, that's somebody the GC can hire whoever they want on that. There's no pre-qualification process. There's nothing that the district has as far as the say goes and who they select. They carry that with them as part of their portion of the bid. And then a filed subcontractor is somebody who they have to go through the bidding process, and we have to do a pre-qualification process for them. We can if we've had bad experiences with some of these filed subcontractors, we can disqualify them from actually even bidding on the project. So we have a little bit of say in that, but again, the general contractor has to pick up the low bid of those filed subcontractors.
The purpose of that is so that the general contractors aren't bid shopping, that once the filed sub-bidders put in their bid and they select that person, that filed subcontractor, they have to use that filed subcontractor. They can't then go to another subcontractor and try and beat that other person's price.
Right.
That's the whole purpose of the filed sub-bids.
Yeah, so are there certain aspects of a project that would require filed subbids versus non-filed subbids, or is it, yes?
There is, yeah.
Yes.
Typically, it's usually your major, so like your electrical, plumbing, painting, what's that, masonry?
Elevator,
Yeah, those things are usually filed sub where you're doing roofing, yeah.
Okay, thank
So
you.
the majority of them are filed subs, but the GC does have, non-filed that they can carry with them, that they get to select on their own, and the district really doesn't have a say in that.
Non-filed, so they tend to be the smaller contracts. Is that,
Well, site work's usually a big contract, but that's not necessarily dollar value. So site work and, kind of depends.
There's
on-
13 or 12 or 13 of them in
So
total.
generally, 50% of the cost comes in as filed subbids, and 50% of the cost comes in under the GC.
Right.
It's a
Umbrella.
very unique process to Massachusetts. It is a pain in the butt, because for us, if we say, here's a piece of flashing, and we detail it perfectly, it's in the drawings, but we don't say who owns it, then the mason says, I don't own that flashing, the general contractor owns that flashing. The general contractor says, the mason owns that flashing, I don't own that flashing. So it to be very specific on who needs to provide what piece throughout the whole building. It's a nightmare, but to Alan's point, the benefit is that, you're making sure that the GC is not just whittling down the price and getting someone on board who's not qualified for the project. So you're hoping that but what divisions of labor fall under filed subbid does not really make sense to me. I think it's how strong your lobby is in Boston.
Right.
frankly.
Over the years, back 100 years ago, an architect's set of drawings were probably, an inch thick, and the specification was a half inch thick or something like that. What, Kristen's alluding to is he's had to detail so many things, and now you have 3 volumes that look like New York phone books for your specifications, and the drawings are 300-400 pages of drawings, because if you don't have it detailed, they're going to tell you they don't own it, and that it's a change order, and there's going to be finger pointing between the file subbidders to who owns it or who doesn't own it.
So we'll do our best, but we will get those types of issues.
Right. Happens on every project.
And that's why we have contingencies. We have construction contingencies just for those types of items, so that, the budget stays intact.
Right.
But you'll get that with either delivery method. You'll get it with either delivery method.
Either,
Yes.
You're
little
not
le-
gonna get it with one.
Right,
little
every
less
project's
so
gonna have change
with a
orders.
construction manager at risk, because they're part of the team. The other thing with the construction manager at risk is, we talked about the 2 estimators, that the architect has an estimator and we have an estimator. If you have a construction manager at risk, they're doing one of those estimates, and then the architect has another estimator. So they're now pouring into those drawings, and they're telling you what they're carrying for costs of those drawings at that level. So that's very helpful. So they're the ones that are going to be on the hook to make it come in at that price, because they're throwing that number out early. The estimators in the GC process, at the end of the day, they go, well, we did our best. I guess if it really comes down to it.
Right.
Sorry, did you say that, did I hear a question about change orders versus, during the GC versus a construction
CM at
manager?
risk?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you,
There-
was that the
there-
question?
It wasn't a question, it was a statement.
It's a state. You will have change orders. no
Either
matter
way, either delivery method.
Which process.
Yeah, but do you see more in GC as opposed to CM at risk?
Typically, yes, I would say that we do see that, because they're going against the other GCs when they're bidding it, so they're sharpening their pencils very
Yeah.
tight, and so anything that isn't crystal clear in the documents or the specifications, will probably arise as a change order, where you're working with a construction manager, and he's been involved in the process now for 9 months more than the GC looking at it. He's understanding that this flashing goes here and it continues down that whole other wall. So he's got a mental note that, yes, it's in there, even if the documents don't clearly indicate that.
Right. And when they're doing their estimating, they're part of that design process and being a part of the estimator. So when we kind of come together and do that reconciliation, they may see something that we didn't see on our end, or vice versa.
I don't want to jump ahead.
Yeah.
But I did see in one of the slides, it says that generally, or the disadvantage of a CM at risk is that they are generally more expensive.
They-
Yeah.
As
they are.
much as 15%.
And it could be and that's the really high level is 15%, and that's of the construction cost.
That's what we have been.
Does that include change orders? That's where I was going with that.
No, they are charging for those services, that you're higher. The nice part about having a construction manager at risk is you get to choose who that is. First of all, you have to have approval by the Inspector General's office to allow you to go with a CM at risk. But then once you do that, we put out a request for services to the CM at risk, and we get, 4 or 5 or 6 or how many that apply for that. And you do interviews, and you select who you want on your team. They become part of the team until after all the bids come in, then they transition into basically a general contractor building the building for you. So they really are helping you. There's a cost to it. You could exclude the estimator, that one estimator cost from that, but that's not a lot of money per se. But they become part of the team, and there's some ownership in the project for them as well to be part of the team.
And that 15% is being really conservative. That number recently is starting to come down as construction is starting to level out, and the fact that CM risk is starting to become a little bit more popular than a hard bid. There's more, it's a more of a competitive nature where that number is starting to get closer to, 10%, if not starting to drop down a little bit more. But we have seen them as high as 15%, and, that's we put that number in there as being kind of
Sure.
the top tier of percentage.
But when you're coming up with that 15%, is that all in, including all change orders, whether it's construction manager at
No.
risk or, okay, it's not?
No. So if there's something that's obviously missing that they didn't account for, that's going to be a change order. It reduces the amount of change orders, but it certainly doesn't give you, it's.
Yeah, Lynn was just if that 15%, if that captures the change orders.
In some instances it does, but not always, is I guess what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it kind of depends on it. If there was something that was big, that was kind of missed by everybody, it kind of can change things.
Right.
But,
The other advantage that the CM can do, we talked about the earlier package, they can get work done in an early package to get you going faster. So we're talking about the schedule, we're talking about the time commitment. With a CM, yes, it's going to cost some more money, but you may be able to use that to your advantage to get things rolling faster in the construction. The other thing that we've had a lot of issues with is supply chain, where things are 24 months to get an emergency generator. Or switch gear for electrical. Okay, you have a hard bid, it comes in, the guy says, well, what do you want me to do? It's 2 years from now before you're going to get your emergency generator. Okay, well, how do you open a school without the emergency generator? Where with a CM, they can do pre-purchasing of these things for you and act as your agent in that regard to bring those things in so that they can mitigate that long lead time for some of these items.
yeah, we had to do that actually with David Prouty High School. They had a pre-purchase, it's Fontaine, who's the CM, they pre-purchased a generator and switchgear for that building because it was like a 1.5 year lead time. And so they purchased that during design, and then they didn't even have an electrician on board or a plumber or anybody. So they would just write that equipment into their specifications and say, this is equipment that you have to carry in your bid, and this is what you're going to be using. So it kind of transfers over to the electrician or whoever the other trade contractor is. But you're going to have it on time versus what Alan was just saying, that, you get to 100% and then it's like, oh, we're going to start construction, but you're not going to have your generator for, the time the building's ready to be open. Yeah.
I have 2 questions
Sure.
for you. One of them is just about, on the general contractor legal clarifications. Am I understanding this correctly, that a pre-qualification for a general contractor, we do not do that? They are pre-qualified by another entity?
No, we do that.
No,
We do that.
Yeah.
We do that.
So we set up
Do we do interviews in the same kind
There's
of
no
way? or
interviews,
that's-
nope.
Okay.
So we set up kind of a small, kind of a pre-qualification committee, we'll call it.
Oh, okay.
Usually we have ourselves, the architect will take some folks from the committee will take, a couple.
Okay.
And we go through it, and there's a whole spreadsheet that we have.
Yeah.
That lists the questions that we're looking for. We're looking at, have you had any legal issues in the past 5 years? MBE, WBE. We're looking at, there's a whole criteria there, and then you're looking at, are they DCAM certified? And then you're doing reference checks.
Okay.
And so everybody's getting the
So
same,
we're able to sort of pre-select who we're going to be looking at a lower bid from.
yes.
In advance.
Yes, so you would
Okay.
put out a request for qualifications, an RFQ. They're going to send it back. So anybody who's interested, and anybody who does not submit one of those cannot bid on this project. They have to be pre-qualified.
But it's fairly difficult to disqualify.
It's very
there,
difficult to
right?
disqualify, yeah. And
It's hard to disqualify somebody from pre-qual. What is
Right.
not so difficult is to disqualify a low
better,
bidder.
yeah.
That if you have a low bid that you don't think is rational for the project, and there's a good reason to want to not go with them, you can get rid of them.
Yeah, 'cause
The Attorney General will stand behind that.
Yeah, the pre-qualification is based off of scores, essentially, so you could have a bad reference, and it still doesn't drop you below that 70%. But during the bidding phase, if you can call and just get a bad reference, and they're the low bidder, you can disqualify them at that point. But yes, during the pre-qual, to answer your question, yes, it is difficult to
And they will
disqualify them.
protest during the
Right, which
pre-qual
delays
process.
things and all
We'll
that kind of stuff.
delay the project.
Right. Yep.
Can I also ask, could you speak to the strengths and weaknesses of each of these options when we're talking about an occupied site build?
Yeah, so, and it depends on the situation. If you have a really tight site, or if you have a project that's going to be built in phases, so if you were going to be building a section of a building and then moving kids over and then, building the rest of the building, if there's multiple phases, usually that's, you're like, you want to see them, you're like, because you want to help that, you want them to be on early so they can help with that logistics of how is that phasing going to work, how is that going to be for parent drop-off, because we're going to be switching it, so it's great to have a CM on board for that. This project is not necessarily logistically tough, because it's, you're building the building, you're going to move the kids in, and then you're going to demo and do the fields over there. So logistically, it's not going to be too complicated. It's not going to be phased out. It's going to be, essentially, build, move in, demo, do the fields. So going at a CM or a GC, it would be pretty straightforward for either one of them. So from that aspect, I don't think a CM at risk is necessary for building purposes.
Carissa, if you have any questions, just yell them out.
No, you guys are doing a really good job. I'm learning a lot because I don't really know any of this, so I'm just listening and taking it all in.
Okay, cool. Anyone else?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Hearing what you've explained here and then looking at the schedule,
Yeah.
it seems like potentially CM at risk could have this happen on a quicker timeline? Maybe?
Yes.
Gain a little bit of
I
time?
think what it does more than make it happen faster is it allows for things to happen over a summer period. That's less disruption for the teachers and the students and the parents versus everything kind of happening during the school year. So you can get in there and do some early site work packages during the summer, which certainly helps with the disruption during the school day. But either method, I think we're thinking of still, is if we can get a September town meeting, we'd still be able to move in the the summer of '28.
I'm wondering if we could just maybe go through the rest of the pros
We
and
can,
cons.
yeah. I know we're jumping around everywhere.
No,
And I know we're hitting a lot of points that will be up on the slide, so.
It'll be quick, but
Yeah.
I think it might be helpful.
Yeah, so I think we can go through this. We talked about the legal kind of clarifications with, the low and responsible bidder is the legal,
Sorry.
that's right.
While Marty's doing that, can I ask a question? Is it the same companies that bid as both of these types of bids, or is it like
It's a
totally
good question.
different
So
companies?
there are some companies that will do both. There's some
Yeah.
companies that will only take CM jobs, and there's some
Okay.
companies that won't do CM jobs, they'll just do hard bids. So,
Okay.
you know,
So it could be this. It could be some of the same people that we're getting either way. But
it could be.
Okay.
But yeah, there are definitely some companies that strictly just go CM, and
Okay.
they don't want to deal with a hard bid.
okay.
You can go to the next slide, I think, Marty. All right, so the construction manager at risk overview. Again, the CM process requires a local and OIG approval in advance. That's the Inspector General's office. So what we have to do is we have to put in an application to the Inspector General's office for justification why this project should go CM at risk. So when CM at risk first came out, because you're not going to like a bid process and taking the lowest bidder, they wanted to have a justification in place why you want to go CM at risk versus going at a hard bid. So that application is submitted, we put our reasoning behind it, and that needs to be reviewed by the Inspector General's office, which could take up to 60 days probably before they actually get back to you.
Are there like certain kinds of justifications that are accepted and others that are not? What do you have to say?
Schedule could be one,
Yeah.
that we have a tight schedule that we
Okay.
want to do, or if it's a phased project where students are involved in safety of students, that would be a very good reason to have a construction manager at risk.
Yeah, the
It all
logistics of
depends
it.
on the project type.
Right. I haven't been on a project yet that's been rejected.
Okay.
I don't know if, Kristen, if you've dealt with any?
It's typically straightforward.
Yeah, right. But again, that process takes about, 60 days, and then they get back to you and let you know their findings. And then a CM is retained early in the design process, as we talked about, to provide expertise on budget, schedule, phasing, logistics, and constructability. The CM is selected based upon a qualification process, so it's similar to how you selected an OPM. So they would submit their qualifications, and then you would narrow those down to, how many of you decide if you want to interview 3, you do interviews. They would bring their entire team who's going to be on the project, where they talk through the project, they'll talk through the schedule, and, logistics of setting it up. So they put a lot of work into these presentations, and really get to know the project. And then once you select the CM, and then you go through and then you do your negotiations from there. Usually, the first one is just the pre-construction. So you would set up a budget for pre-construction, and then you would kind of negotiate to hopefully come within that budget. Yep.
And does that tend to be roughly on par with where you all expected it to be? Or might we find some large disparities between what we expected and where we start hearing from them after?
What are you referring to?
In
I'm
other
sorry.
words, like, if we enter fee negotiations, we've already chosen somebody, are we likely to suddenly hear a number that's dramatically larger than we expected, and now we're stuck with a person trying
Well,
to
you're not
walk
stuck,
it
because
back?
if you
or-
can't negotiate, you can go with
Oh,
somebody
okay.
else.
So the
Yeah.
fee negotiation is still part of that process
Yes.
before you're live?
Yeah.
Carry
Yep.
on. Thank you.
And that fee negotiation would be for their pre-construction services. And it's, it's usually, $100,000, maybe $150,000 to work for those 9 months that the architect's putting together drawings and do all the estimating, things like that. But then the bids that come in, it's called open book, that you can look at the books all the time, that they're receiving their bids from their filed subcontractors, so you can see, we track it for you as to what the dollars are coming in at, so there's no, I don't want to say shenanigans, that's just a bad word, but there's no, you can't, you see it now you don't see that type of stuff. It's very straightforward,
Yeah.
all above board.
Yeah, and they set up their bid packages as they need them, as the design is ready for it, so there'll be a lot more of that going out to bid for the subcontractors versus just the one time with a GC bid. And still, even on their back, I'm sorry, Marty, go back 1 second, I know we want to get through this, but, so Mass General Law, the requirement for pre-qualification on the filed subs still is happening. We're still working together, but now we have a CM who's actually, they're part of that process as well. And so they're bringing their experience with maybe some filed subs that we have not had any experience with, or design team haven't, and they can bring that experience in, and they're part of that whole pre-qualification process as well, which is another advantage.
Are there still
getting
non-filed?
a low qualified bidder for electrical and mechanical
Right.
and plumbing.
Yeah.
So that part doesn't fall under the CM process. It's confusing.
Yeah.
Maybe you're gonna get to this, but, so if the CM process is more expensive generally.
Yep.
You're only paying the CM $150,000, say, to do all the, sit in on the design process.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you just do that, have an expert sit in before you have a general contract?
You could. I think there's more continuity if you have somebody that's doing that process and then also overseeing the entire construction process for hiring all the final submitters and managing that for you. And then, we're overseeing what they're doing, to make sure they're doing it, by mass law, and you have an open book on it.
I guess I'll keep paying attention. I just don't see where the value add is coming in.
I tend to think of it like home insurance, that you're going to pay a premium every year for home insurance. You may never ever have to call upon it, unless your house burns down, and then you're glad you had it. But at the end of the day, you don't want to go out there exposed when you do something like that. And I think you're reducing your exposure with the CM at risk than a general contractor.
And maybe, and Christian, you're on design side of things with a CM.
Yeah, what's interesting is it changes the whole dynamic during construction, right? They're part of the team. How it's set up otherwise is we like to get along with our general contractors whenever possible, and usually that happens, and it, is great, but sometimes you don't. And it turns into a very long, arduous process for everyone involved, including the building committee in the district, frankly. And so with the CM, right, they're part of the process, they're on board, and you're approaching problems as a team. Whereas when problems come up during a GC, it's just much more adversarial.
Yeah, so the CM comes on early. They'll start coming to these meetings. They're going to be on site. They'll have teams, throughout the entire process. Where the other way around, the GC, as Christian's saying, so they're kind of siloed out on their own. And if an issue comes up, we're sitting here together. How are we going to, resolve this issue without the GC actually being in the room? They're in early enough that they help with that early design and kind of give their input through design as we go into construction. And the big thing is you get to select who you want as a general contractor versus a low bid where you could get a pre-qualified bidder in there, but you are essentially stuck with the low bid.
What portion of school districts or towns go with each of these models?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I don't have a percentage, but CM at risk is starting to become more popular than the GC. I know, Alan, you did one recently. We're done
two
with JWA. You've done two.
We're doing Diamond Tech on Fall River as a construction manager at risk. We did Bristol County Aggie as a construction manager at risk, and those are just, and the reason being for those projects were site logistics and student population and moving the students around while the construction was going on. So it was a big safety issue as to how to construct this and keep school in operation, where I think we have a little different exposure here, where we could build it out on the fields and, as Adam said, then take down the old school and not have a lot of conflict. I still look at it as you want to be able to have a say in who your contractor is, and you have that say if you hire a construction manager at risk. And there are a lot of good ones out there. There are a lot of not so good ones that might want to take advantage of you or try to take advantage of you. I think in Western Mass, you're not going to get that kind of firm. You're gonna you might, if you're in the Boston area, you might have to be very particular about which one you selected and which ones you felt were honorable and not so honorable.
So some of the projects that we've looked at East Hampton, West Springfield, we looked at Prouty, we've looked at Walpole.
Yeah.
Do we know, what did they?
So Prouty was CM at risk. East Hampton was a GC hard bid.
Okay.
You just went to Walpole, which was, or no, where'd you go?
CM.
CM.
East Long Meadow High School decided to go CM also.
Right.
His spelling was CM.
The high school was? Okay.
I didn't think it was offered back then, was that?
Was it?
I didn't think CM at risk option was an option back then, was it?
I thought it was. Jocelyn Lesser?
Yeah.
No, they were our project manager.
Oh.
They were the
Tony,
opium.
Remember, Gil
Yeah.
Bain was the general contractor. I think it was a design bid build for the high school.
And Gilbane's usually just a CM at risk, but they did hard bid because of the economy back when the high school was done.
Yeah.
That's very unusual for them to hard bid a project.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, sorry. Yeah. I guess I'm having a hard time seeing how there wouldn't be a significant reduction in change orders with a CM at risk.
So that's one of the arguments, is that you're paying more for the CM at risk, but in the long run, that difference gets a little bit smaller because you're paying for more change orders with the GC.
Yeah.
And there's lots of arguments on whether you pay for enough change orders with the GC that it equals the cost of the CM. Probably not, but it probably gets closer. So
It's project specific, you know, you could have one
Yeah.
project that goes very smooth and no issues, and you get a GC that, you know, will do some favors here and there and be like, don't worry, I got it, or you have a GC who will come after you for every single penny. So it depends on the project, it's definitely specific.
One question, and but I'm really anxious to eager to hear from Chris and Dave on this, because I have a feeling they have some experience with it. But my question is, knowing that we're trying to be especially mindful of our neighbors, and, you know, having, during the construction process and then the final outcome, we want it to be something that complements the community, is safe, and, you know, lots of conversations about traffic and congestion and the disruption of construction and everything. Knowing that's a big factor for us, it would seem to point us towards a CM at risk model where you have somebody who can do that, who can represent us at every stage. Is that a fair assumption?
Oh, absolutely, because they're the ones who are going to be setting up, you know, the staging, they're going to be setting up construction fence and doing the construction roadways, all that stuff. So having them on board, we can kind of put our best efforts as far as this is how we think it should be set up, but a contractor just has that experience of, you know, constructability-wise, this is what we're going to need, and in order to make the abutters happy, everybody safe, and be as less disruptive as we can to the existing school that's there now, it's definitely a benefit to have a CM in there early on, and while we're doing the design, to help with those logistic plans before construction starts. Otherwise, you're bringing in a GC, and they're ready to get going. They're going to go off of our logistics plans. They may have a couple tweaks, but, you know, they won't have that input and hear, you know, the concerns that we've had, you know, for those months and months ahead of time.
So would they then create their own sort of plan on their own at that point? And we're
Yeah,
just
they would
kind
be
of,
there as far as, a lot of
we have
times
less
they
of a
would
voice about
take
what that plan looks
and
like.
mark up, you know, maybe Jones Whitsett's plan and be like, and have all their input as far as how the logistic plan should be set up, and lay down areas for materials and contractor parking, all that stuff. And if they were going to be moving the construction fence around, maybe to do some phasing and the site work, the best way to do that, and how they feel it should work the best way.
So with the general contractor, we have less of a voice in how the logistics of this kind of play out when it comes to
Yeah, usually.
neighborhood
Yeah,
drop-off,
so usually we'll
pickup,
put together a
all those
logistics
things.
plan. The general contractor will bid the project and have that logistics plan in there and say, okay, I own X amount of construction fence, I have this, and, you know, this is the plan you guys put together for me. You know, I'm just executing what you put together, if there is any issues.
The general contractor could be less sensitive to the, you know, those issues that
Right.
are of concern to everybody.
Yeah, so if they're a part of these
We're-
meetings and hearing during design what the issues are, they're going to be, again, you know, more sensitive to those and responsive to them.
Go ahead.
Because, well, I assume the answer is no, but is there a difference in terms of CM at risk versus design bid build in terms of bonding or financing? The reason I ask, Adam, is because you had mentioned pre-buying things
Yeah.
going into the process, so would we have to go for, you know, earlier bonding for a piece of it, or we would do it all at once? What would that look like?
It depends, I mean, and how.
How expensive that item is. I mean,
Right.
In the case of Spencer, I think that Fontaine has taken it under themselves with their relationship with the electrical gear people or the emergency generator to maybe, put in the order and put just a down payment on it. I'm not sure exactly how
I think they did,
procured
that's
it.
it, yeah, so as far as their pre-purchase went, they
So-
set up an agreement to do that, so we weren't paying for that up front. It came when we actually brought on an electrician during one of the bid packages, and so that amendment to their contract was then built in for that generator or that switchgear that was in place.
They have that kind of buying power to be able to do that, where I don't think a general contractor necessarily would have to do it, or if they did, they'd go to some maybe unknown, company that had who knows what kind of generator.
Well, you lose your opportunity to have that pre-purchase as
Right.
well, because you're bringing somebody on, and
Yeah.
then they're looking at the drawings, really, they looked at them during bid, but they're looking at them for the first time.
We're not, enforcing either one on you. We're just telling you what the differences are. We think there are benefits here that given this project, given the tightness of the site, given the community involvement and the neighbors, and all those things, that we think it might be something worth looking at to do a construction manager at risk, just for the belts and suspenders that you get with that.
This building was CM at risk, I just looked at it.
No, I was wondering from Dave and Chris's perspective, what we should be thinking about, or if you had any thoughts for us. I'm curious.
So I'm doing large power plant projects for the last couple decades, and we do turnkey delivery. Meaning it's all in, just like we're talking about right here. Every project we've ever worked on, construction phase is where we lose the most compared to budget. And so, everything I've heard is consistent, everything you're saying is consistent with my same experience. I would phrase it a little bit differently. It's about building commercial leverage, contractual leverage over the construction contractor. If that construction contractor that is CM is involved during the design phase, there's minutes of meeting documenting the decisions taken with their support, with their presence. That's commercial leverage to fight back against the change orders that come up, because both CM and the GC should be raising the same change orders. They're both looking after their own profit margin the same way. But if you have leverage over one versus another, you have a better chance of pushing back on that change order request. That's the way I'm looking at this. And that's the insurance you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
That's the benefit you're asking about, Josh, is what are we paying for, that premium? It's for that leverage to have over that GC, that ultimate GC in the end. That's the way I view it.
That's a great way to put it.
I guess what I'm just coming back to is if they're in the room the whole time, it's similar to what Lynn was saying, it's that 15% that's killing it, because that might be $18 million. Like that, we are stewards of the town's money here. We have to be really careful. And if we're getting the same change orders, if we have leverage, that's great. But shouldn't they be, if they're in the room from the very beginning, they should be figuring these things out as we go.
And that's the point, and that is the leverage, is that they're in the room figuring out with you, or documenting that they're figuring out with us. So when they raise that, you say, no, here's the documentation that shows that you were on board with it at that point in time. So they might not raise it because they already know that we have that definition.
I get that, but are we gonna, worst case scenario, is that worth $18 million to us? And that's really, it's hard for me to wrap my head around that. I'm understanding, and I think I'm glad you explained it like that, because that is very helpful. That's a lot of money.
The one thing we have heard from the estimators that we have on the project already, that number has come down. That 15% is more like 6 to 8% now, they're saying.
Shoot at that.
But we have seen 50.
Right. Because the economy has changed since 3 years ago,
Is
when
that-
inflation was going crazy.
So our cost estimators did show us both options at the PSR, and so that was, again, PSR early numbers, basing our estimate off of square footage, really. But the design bid build was coming in at 116.8 million, and the CM was coming in at 123.8 million, so a $7 million difference.
That's the construction.
That's in
only?
construction costs,
Yeah.
not project.
So that's what percentage, 6 or something?
That's somewhere in there,
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Nicole.
Just as a follow-up for that, what percentage do change orders typically come in at? Is there a percentage that you could quote?
Well-
Do they average around a particular percentage of a project?
I wish Christian would hear this when I say it, but there's what we call standard of care, and standard of care is his documents, having what in those documents, so what he's supposed to have in there. When it exceeds 3%, change orders on the construction value, we kind of look at them and go, your standard of care seemed to go out the window. But if it's under the 3% or, 2% or something like that, it's within, normal realm of change orders on a project. I mean, am I being fair on that?
Yeah, and you'll find this, so there's different types of change orders too, right? So if there's gonna be mistakes in our documents, we should all think about that now, which is helpful for us a year from now when we have this conversation again, or 2 years from now. But then there's also like unforeseen conditions. So if we find ledge at the site, that doesn't get taken into account with that 3%, because there's some things that are just a surprise to everybody. Suddenly there's a whole bunch more hazardous materials in the building. We tested it, we did our best to find it, it was hidden in this one, but generally, yeah, that's the right ballpark.
Yeah, and the MSBA, they have 4 different categories that they ask us to put into the change order bucket, essentially. So it's going to be unforeseen condition, as Christian just mentioned, a design issue. There's going to be an owner's request, which during construction, somebody comes up with an idea saying, what we should have done, and then if we can incorporate it, it's going to be a change order. And then a third party, which is your building inspector comes in, and because they can go, there's code, but then they could say, no, here I want to see X, Y, and Z above code, and they can come in and kind of force us to do something, which would be a change order. So those are the 4 buckets that the MSBA has, and that's how we identify change orders between those 4 different buckets.
Yeah, so I do a lot of family housing developments, right? So we do projects from like 20 million to 200 million. I only have a CMR project on one other project. It happens to be with Christian, actually, where it's a multi-phased, occupied. We have a commercial co-op partner with a super complicated project. We have CMR for that. Everything else is GC hard bid. So I don't think this project's complicated enough for a CMR, in my opinion. I don't think we have a good design team. We have a good owner's rep. I don't know that we're going to get $8 million of value out of the CMR on this project. It's not a rehab. It's not occupied rehab. It's not an addition. We're building a new building. We should know what we're doing pretty much within 2%, 3%. We should be able to figure it out with the team we have.
Yeah, and I think that's where, as far as the site goes, it is a pretty straightforward site. It's a pretty straightforward move. The advantages would be is to select your own contractor and start some early site work packages is really probably the 2 big things of having a CM, and is that worth the money at this point?
On the early work piece of it, like how much speed do you gain out of it? Maybe you already said that, but like.
Well, they can get in there and start doing, again, if we got, they can, so you have your 60% documents, and then you have 90% all the way through 100. That's, how much they're through their design. So you can start kind of like, if after the 60% documents, if those are good enough to start some site work, you can get in maybe over that summer, and if we went, just an example, you went geothermal, you could start doing some geothermal drilling over the summer versus doing drilling while school is occupied. So again, I don't think it's going to save us time.
Okay.
I think we're still going to be that summer of '28, whether it's GC or whether it's CM at risk. It's really just if we want to get in there in the summer and kind of do some work ahead of time before school starts up again in the fall.
Okay.
What about the long lead equipment and the global supply chain issue?
Yeah, that's something, I mean, yes.
I see it every day. And
Yeah.
Supply chain and customs clearance is crazy bad right now.
Right, yeah.
Is there value there with the CM at risk? And
Well, as far as pre-purchasing go, yeah, of course. If you're going to have
packages prepped before the GC onboard date, otherwise.
Right. So if you have switchgear, if that's not in on time, you can have the entire building complete except for that, and still not be able to occupy the building, obviously. So getting those pre-purchased ahead of time and making sure they're there on time, yeah, that definitely brings a benefit to the project.
And those big components that you're talking about, do you have the notional lead times for those now based on what we're seeing otherwise in the market in the last few months? Because, everything that I'm trying to buy right now is literally 2 times as long, and that's like, instead of 6 months, it's 12 months.
Yeah, so the projects I'm on
days,
now,
it's
we're
months.
kind of in the middle of construction, so anything that's been a lead time issue has already been either purchased or is on site. But we can talk to any of the contractors that we're working with because they're always buying this equipment, and we can easily get a lead time, issues. They usually have an issues like that they talk about in their weekly meetings as far as any lead time issues. And we can get a copy of that and, and kind of make sure we have that going into the project, which we typically do anyways.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out if there was some way to quantify exactly what the CMR would bring in terms of lead time advantage, for those long lead components. Because I mean, even bolts right now for me is crazy. Just trying to buy bolts is insanely long.
Yeah.
No.
So just on that schedule thing.
Yeah.
If a CM at risk can start between 60 and 90% design, that looks like it's putting us like April, May, June, July, August of 26.
Yeah.
And so this is my question. We don't go out to bid for a GC until we're 100% bid set complete?
Yeah.
So that's September of 26. So we wouldn't be going out to bid until roughly September of 26. We already would have had potentially 3 months of a CM at risk doing stuff if they could. I guess I'm not seeing how it doesn't save us a ton of time. And then the other thing I'm worried about, now that you just said bolts, is the conversation that's happening about tariffs on stuff coming in.
Right, we were just talking about that before the meeting, Alan and I, that.
The complexion, nobody knows really what's going to happen.
Yeah.
If those things are enacted.
Right, but regardless of the tariffs, the delay that it will mean that's associated with that.
And that's the customs clearance issue that I was talking about
Yeah.
earlier is, just the Russian limitations already in place for the last 4 years. It's crazy the documentation that needs to be in hand to get anything through customs. And that's like steel and bolts, but it's all, everything needs to be I's dotted, T's crossed, nicely stacked with customs before anything gets released.
Well, on the topic of steel, I know, and it sounds like the answer is no, but with the domestic product bonus that's being offered through the Inflation Reduction Act, you would think that that would bring U.S. manufacturers up to speed, but it sounds like we're still behind in terms of steel manufacturing.
You can't increase throughput that fast. I mean, you can't just turn steel production on.
Right.
So it's a long
So
term.
even if we were to benefit from that bonus, it would be negligible, essentially.
Yeah, and we don't know what that bonus is going to do. If you're buying in America, the cost could be that much higher that, the credits you're getting back on it don't really cover the cost for purchasing in America.
And if the CM at risk approach helps you get out earlier, is there some value to the time there? In other words, if you're getting out early on some of these packages, does that save you money because construction costs are always escalating?
Sure.
Is that another part of the calculus that we have to factor in?
Yeah, you always have your
Yeah.
escalation in there. The longer you go
Yeah.
out, you tack on that escalation.
Or to say it the other way, if you push schedule out because of late components, you have an extension of time costs for those
Right.
contractors staying on board for those extra months beyond
Right, you have
project
general
plan.
conditions, you have all that stuff that you're paying for.
Sorry, I'm belaboring this issue
No,
on the
that's okay.
timing.
Yep.
So if we go GC, we go out to bid September of 26,
Yep.
or 26, that's 60 days? Like, how long are we looking at to be out to bid to get that in, to do that whole process?
Yeah, so we're looking at, so we have the pre-qualification process, we have to go through trade contract, through selection. So essentially, in order to, when we issue a notice to proceed to the contractor, we're looking at, December 1st is what we have in here.
So that's 6 months.
Yeah, by the
I
time.
mean, that's like a significant amount of time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Because if we have we're in winter then.
right.
When I don't know. I mean, I'm not decided. I don't have a solid decision yet.
No,
but
and
that
I'm not
to
looking
me
for a
is
solid decision tonight. This is really just, I know this is our first time really talking about it. So this is just us kind of giving the time to talk, and have these questions back and forth. And then when we meet again next month, we can, I'm sure there'll be time to process and come up with other questions that we can talk about this again. We'll make sure we have that on the agenda.
Are there additional pieces of information that people want that would make that decision easier? besides exactly how much it will cost.
I mean, I'd be curious for more data on the timing issue. Is there a way that we can look at a few examples of area projects and what the timing looked like at GC and what it looked like at CMR? That could be potentially helpful to give us a little bit more of a
Yeah.
solid footing on what that timing might actually look like.
And I think I'd want a better understanding on, because our site, as Chris was saying, is pretty straightforward.
Right.
Do we actually gain anything by starting that much earlier? Like, is there enough that they can do there that it's going to make a difference?
The example that I can think of is East Long Meadow, where it's also pretty similar, straightforward new construction, then tear down the old. I will say the CM brought in a lot of ideas on how to maneuver around the site, thinking about neighbors and thinking about school being in session and students needing to get to play fields that were over here while their laydown area was over here, and that they're going to have electronic crossing signals. And so there's just a lot more consideration for site safety than I think there maybe would have been otherwise. That schedule is under an insane schedule, like very, very aggressive, and there's no way we would have been able to meet it with a design bid build approach. And so, yeah, they were doing site work when we had just finished the 60% CDs, and they were in the ground like a week later.
Wow.
And so it all depends on kind of it does kind of come down to the town vote and then going from there. And so with some projects, I don't know, I think we'd have to look at it in a little more detail, but in some projects, saving 6 months makes a huge difference, and then in some projects, saving 6 months really doesn't make much of a difference just because of how the seasons go and how the whole project schedule as a whole goes. But for that particular project, that was a huge reason why they went.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Kristen, but in East Long Meadow, it's a fairly large site also. It's not as constrained
Very large.
as we have
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
I have a question. I've stayed silent for like this entire time, just listening to everyone. We started off with a very concerned mid-year move. And one of the things I keep thinking about is, I think you said it an hour ago at this point, with the general contractors, and you gave the example of flashing, and then, oh, it's not mine. Do you find that because people are trying not to take ownership of something they're supposed to do, that we actually get even more delays because of that? Because then I'm just nervous if, like Lynn's saying, we've got 6 months advantage with the CM at risk, and then we have people who are arguing, and I'm just thinking, like, this is just me hypothetically. I'm sitting there, I know that February break is something supposed to get done, but now nobody's taking ownership of whatever's supposed to get done. They don't do a February break. I've got teachers who are supposed to expect X, Y, and Z, and now they're doing it while we're back at school. These are just things that are popping into my mind, and I'm wondering if a CM at risk helps me in that manner. Just feel comfortable, all of us, school committee, everybody just feel comfortable with the timeline, or does it push us back? Do we just keep falling even farther? Is that a
Right.
potential?
So I guess I'd answer that two ways. In terms of, arguing over flashing, does that impact time? I would say generally not so much.
Okay.
It does impact change orders. And so, again, having that CM input early on, and they have a preference too. Like, on my past we're dealing with this right now, they want that flashing owned by a certain filed sub, or they want it owned by their drywall installer. And so they'll let us know, and then we can incorporate that into the documents. On your question in terms of can the CM help the school feel more comfortable? I think we're seeing it every day at Prouty that I think that you can get that support from a GC. It's just a roll of the dice on who you're going to get.
It's not typical.
And so we've had projects where we've had a great GC, and they've been a partner, and they've been willing to work with the district. Oh, do you need us to move our trailers so that you can do this and this and this? Okay, it's going to cost a little bit extra, but yeah, we can do that. Or we can even find a way to do it so that it's not so expensive. Or you can get a GC who says, yeah, I'll do that if you pay me $1 million. Like, screw you, I'm just in this to get the job done, and
Right.
I don't care about the relationship. Whereas the CM, because you go through that interview process, the interview process is pretty intense. They will wow you with their technology, and they'll bring in their whole team, and they'll all be dressed in matching suits, and that they want to, they want that relationship, and they want that good recommendation at the end so they can get their next CM job. So yeah, they're very much a part of the process.
It does sound like a good way to avoid mediation at the end of the project. Do you find that in your projects, they go a lot smoother?
Yes.
I think with our luck, we're gonna end up in mediation no matter what.
Don't say that.
Still not get past Brett.
Oh.
Go ahead.
No, I did not have a question. I was
thinking
curious
about-
what you were thinking, because could see you nodding along at various points, so I was wondering
I'm
where.
always thinking.
Yes. I was wondering where your mind was on that.
Don't always stop.
I was thinking about what Chris said in response to Christian's comments, that we have a great team with Colliers and JWA. The great unknown is who the contractor is.
Right.
And so, having to go with the lowest qualified bidder, I don't have a lot of faith that we're able to disqualify bidders. It feels like it's a wide open door. And, and so, for me, having a construction manager at risk who is with us early on, particularly in this community where we're trying to be responsive to, the needs of the whole town and make sure that we're keeping the site safe and make sure that we don't lose a year of school. I mean, the problem with school construction is you lose a month, you might lose a year, right?
Yeah. Right.
And so staying on schedule and getting out early seems to be important, seems to have there's some dollar value to that too.
Yeah.
And then the reduced exposure to change orders seems to be compelling too with the construction manager at risk approach for me.
Yeah, and I think that schedule gives you that buffer that you're talking about. If
Yeah.
something does come up during construction, that is kind of a time suck, you'll have that buffer because you were able to get in there a little bit sooner to
Yeah.
do some preliminary things.
I think all of that makes sense. I think, though, also to Josh's point, like it's a significant additional cost, and it's really hard for us to say for certain that additional cost is worth what we'll get, especially because there are other things that can slow down the process. So we could be like, we paid however many millions of dollars to make this faster, and then something got delayed. We couldn't get the appropriate materials or whatever. So it definitely seems like whatever, taking a little time to think about it.
Yeah.
Can I ask just a clarification again on the cost potential differences? That you said it looked like it was roughly 7-ish, 6.5 to 7-ish million to go up to construction manager. That does not account for the, let's assume, 3% change order with a general contractor?
Right.
So that would be approximately, so roughly 7 million to add in for CMR, roughly 3 to 3.5 million for change orders with the GC-ish.
He doesn't want to answer that.
I know. I'm assuming the 3% though. Let's assume it's the
Ballpark,
3%.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
if it's that 3%, then that's kind of what we're looking at. We're looking
But
at
then there'll
roughly
also
3
be
to
change
4
orders on the
million.
CM side, so then that will go up a small amount. So will the final difference be 7%? Probably not, but will it be 0? I don't
Yeah.
think so. The CM will be more expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the
Just
way we
trying to
set up
figure-
with a CM,
Just trying to figure
so
out how much more.
on our budget, we carry, with the district's budget, there's a contingency. You have owner's contingency, you have construction contingency. Those for items that come up for those 4 categories that I talked about to cover. The CM, if we go CM at risk, they're going to also have a CM contingency that they have built into their contract as well. So it gets definitely a little bit more complicated, that they have their own contingency for items maybe that they missed that they can carry and cover those costs. And at the end of the project, if there's money left in that CM contingency, it comes back to the owner.
Julie mentioned earlier, like, what would be helpful, and I think the timeline information would be really helpful, but
Yep.
also just to map out the financial pluses and minuses, because there's factors that, financial factors that push you towards one model or the other, one delivery approach or the other.
Right.
And just seeing that's in one place, I think, just a,
It
would
would
be
be helpful to
helpful.
know if we're talking about roughly 3 to 5 million difference or 10 to 15 million
Right.
difference.
Yeah.
Those are very different numbers.
Yeah.
So.
And do you actually need this decision next month, or when do you actually need the decision?
Well, I don't know if we need it next month, but because we're looking at, September of next year essentially to start bringing the CM on after
Okay.
the town vote. So,
Okay.
no, I think if we went another, not next month, but the month after to try and.
By the start of next 2025,
Yeah.
because we have the 60 days that the Inspector General can take to give us a blessing before we can even put out a proposal or a request for qualifications, and that takes a couple of months to go through that. So, time marches on to, get the approvals, get the RFQ out,
Yeah.
get them in here, do the interviews, bring them on, negotiate, bring them on board. Before you know it, it's September.
Yeah, so you want to have all that stuff kind of behind you once the town vote happens, so that way, once the project can proceed, you can go in and get a CM on board, because you want them on as soon as we can in that process.
Okay. Sounds good.
But yeah, so I think next month, it'll be a good time to have more questions, let this
Yeah.
digest a little bit, and.
Yeah.
January, we make a decision.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. Do you want to, everybody all set on this? You wanna move on? We have established sustainability goals is our next topic.
So, I thought this might happen. It's late. We've talked about a lot. I have a lot of sustainability slides. We can postpone the whole thing. I can run through it really quick. This is another issue where we do need a vote from the committee on whether we're going to go with LEAD or CHIPS, the Collaborative for High Performing Schools. And so, what are folks?
When does that vote need to happen by? Next
Again,
meeting or
could
at
be
some
next
point in-
meeting or even the meeting after. It helps us in terms of starting to target our approaches to it, and we need the decision before we submit to the MSBA. They want to know which way you're going before the end of
We all
that
have town
design.
meetings, so I'm on board with.
What? You're on board. We have a lot of meetings.
We've had a lot of meetings this week.
I looked at this today, and I don't want to go through it quickly. I think
Yeah.
It makes more sense to.
Right.
Same.
Yeah.
Take your time.
Okay. All
Dive
right.
in for real.
Cool. Do we need to do working groups today?
So the last item on the agenda then was the establishment of working groups. I don't know that this needs a ton of time. The thing that Chairman Ray and I talked about with Colliers was establishing, for now, 2 working groups, 2 advisory groups, a sustainability and site group, and then a group that focuses on athletics and facilities. So with the consent of the committee, I'm happy to work with Colliers on pulling those 2 working groups together, those 2 advisory groups together. We've sort of roughed out a roster of folks that really ought to be part of these working groups. So for example, the athletics group, the head of some of our Park and Rec director, the head of some of the athletic groups in town, our athletic director. So there's some obvious choices, and then sustainability and site. I think we'd like to engage some of the neighbors, just to be sure that they have a voice in the process. So again, with the consent of the committee, I'm happy to work on that with Colliers and Lynn and anybody else that wants to take part. So.
Sounds
Change
good.
the motion.
Do we?
Could help, sure, yeah. All
So
right.
move to empower Marty to work with Colliers to develop these working groups.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? Let's do a vote.
Nicole?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
Carissa?
Yes.
Yes.
Julie? And I'm a yes, so, all right.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Are you ready to?
I think there's no other new business, so we're ready to.
Are we good on meetings? Do we know when we're?
We've set aside the second Wednesday,
December 11th.
December 11th. So does that work for Colliers and
For this next
JWA if
meeting?
we have a meeting on December 11th?
Yep.
6 o'clock?
Okay.
Minutes? Oh, approval of
I think
minutes.
Oh, we did that at the
We
beginning.
did
did
that.
at the beginning,
Yeah.
yeah. We have like different versions of the agenda.
Gingerbread man.
Cool, okay. We have a motion to
Can I
adjourn.
get a
So
motion?
moved.
Yep.
Second?
Second. All right.
Cool.
Nicole?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Davis?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
Carissa?
Yes.
Julie?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. All right.
Thank you. Lots of
you all.
information tonight.
Yes.
Appreciate it.